Well, tonight, a hot button topic. We're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Three words that have become a battleground in America's ongoing struggle with race and opportunity. Now, as lawsuits mount and the Supreme Court strikes down DEI initiatives, people are asking, have these policies created the very discrimination they sought to eliminate? And why do some, in particular, some white men increasingly feel they're being sacrificed on the altar of diversity? Respected scholars argue that DEI has tragically backfired, setting up minority communities for failure rather than success. Daniel, a young white man, says he feels that DEI policies are making him a victim of reverse racism. Take a look.
I feel like people are getting an unfair advantage because of their skin color. I grew up in a predominantly white area. I come from nothing. I was on free lunch in high school, which is like the lowest. So I got a full ride because I grew up in a single mother household. When I got to college, there was this huge emphasis on race. DEI is just fundamentally wrong. Why should a rich black kid have an advantage over a white kid like me who was on food stamps in high school? I remember I got to my college, and in my very first month, I could not participate in a debate tournament because I was white. White male confidence is simply under attack. I mean, who's committing the most suicides? It's white men. Well, I think a lot of white people are seeing this anti-white sentiment and they're feeling unfair because they look at these universities and they say white people founded these universities, white people founded America, and yet now we're treated like second-class people. And when there's classes called the problem of whiteness, when there's fellowships that ban white students, I think that is a clear sign of one group being treated as beneath another. I went to Twitter, I called out a professor teaching a class called the problem of whiteness, and that led her to call me a cyber terrorist. The New York Times wrote an article and the headline says, "You Chicago, cyberbullying or free speech." And I thought it totally proved my point that white people today cannot even speak up about injustice without being treated like a second-class person. I think the treatment black people received is different because white people are a majority in this country. Black people were always a minority. I think it is different when the majority of the country is treated like a second-class group. I think it's disgraceful. I think if you went to China and you said the problem with Chinese people, they would arrest you. I think if you went to Russia, they would arrest you. And so I'm not saying we should arrest people, but I think we should have some respect for white people because they made America possible.
Daniel, thanks for being here. You feel like this has whipped around and you're paying a price for it.
Absolutely. I remember my very first month in college, I was banned from a debate tournament because I was white. And I know that sounds like a nerdy example, but I think it's just a testament that it has gotten so crazy and even on the smallest things. And it's normalized. I was sitting in this room, the kids were saying, yeah, white people are not allowed because, you know, you guys have been winning too much and we need to even the playing field. And I'm looking around and no one is startled, no one is saying, wait a second. And it just startles me how normalized it is, how unapologetic it is. And I'm just worried what's gonna happen in the future. And I don't want to raise any children in a world that simply hates them for being white. I think that's a fair demand, and I hope America can reach a point where we're simply treated for what we add to society and what we bring and for actually being a good person.
Do you agree that we should strive to have equal opportunity for everybody?
Absolutely.
And do you agree that there are members of our society, particularly, I'll start by talking about the black community, that does not have equal opportunity?
Well, see, I don't really agree with that because under the affirmative action system, which only recently ended in 2022, a black kid who went to boarding school in New Hampshire, whose parents worked on Wall Street, who had every advantage, they would still have an advantage in the system than someone like me, who grew up in a single mother household, was low income. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
Isn't that the exception and not the rule in the black community? Most black youth don't go to a boarding school in Connecticut. They tend to be overrepresented in the lower socioeconomic strata in America. I mean, that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
I still don't see that as a valid reason to give one group an advantage over
another. Oh, that wasn't my question.
Oh, okay.
My question was, do you agree that they may not have equal opportunity as a group?
Yes, absolutely, they have obstacles.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that.
I'm not a fan of DEI. I don't think it helps them. I don't think it helps level the playing field. I think it's the wrong approach to a real problem. I'm just saying, do you acknowledge that the problem exists?
Sure, I do.
You think it actually makes racism worse. Why?
Well, I think it makes racism worse for several reasons. I think, number one, we're treating white people wrong for their skin color. We're treating them differently for their skin color. That is racist in nature. And yet you don't see many people talking about it. And I called it out on my school. A professor called me a cyber terrorist. The New York Times called me a cyber bully. I think that's absurd. I think if a black student called out blatant racism, they would be hailed as a hero. They'd probably receive some awards. Number two, people are gonna start wondering, did my doctor actually deserve to be here, or are they a doctor because of affirmative action? Are my pilots actually meant to be here, or are they here because of a quota? And I think that's gonna clearly lead to racism.
There are a lot of very successful black professionals that say they live under the pale of that, with people questioning them when they say they worked damn hard to get where they were, and people go, oh, well, you know, you got here because you got a free pass.
Of course, yeah.
And they resent that.
I think today, you know, if you're a young white guy growing up in high school, middle school, odds are, you know, you're gonna have a teacher who says white people are evil, you should feel white guilt, you should feel white fragility. And I just worry that's gonna discourage people who are white from pursuing greatness.
Do you think white privilege is real?
Absolutely not today.
Yeah. You don't think it's real today, but you think it's maybe been real in the past?
Sure, historically, yeah.
You were labeled a bully and essentially a racist for saying what you were saying.
Yeah, and I think this is exactly why white people are so afraid of speaking out about the most blatant injustices imaginable. They don't want to be canceled, they don't want to be called these mean things, and so they just sit back. But they have to speak up, and so that is my goal above anything else, is I simply want to instill confidence. I want to say, you need to speak up about this wrong, about this injustice, about this grotesque discrimination against white people, because again, it's only going to get worse, and I fear where it's going to go.
And where is that?
I think, you know, I hear, for example, at Yale, a psychiatrist said she has fantasies of shooting white people, and no one spoke up, no one did anything. I fear we're gonna get to this most blatant, borderline genocidal rhetoric if it doesn't stop here. I mean, they're gonna keep going and going because they're getting away with it. And I truly feel like a lot of these people, they hate white people because they think they're evil, they think they have done evil things, and so they project that hatred onto the current white people. I have nothing to do with what my ancestors did. I was born 2003, single mother household, pretty much broke. And I'm not gonna apologize for what happened in the past if they say that's what's needed.
Well, you can't put that on an entire race of people.
Of course not.
I mean, you're saying that's what black people think.
No, I'm not saying that's what all think, but I do think there is a contingent of black academics and black politicians who legitimately want to make white people go through the same stuff black people maybe went through 100 years ago. They feel like it's now white people's obligation to face that same level of discrimination. And my only question is, where is this going to stop? I do believe in black privilege when it comes to things like university admissions, when it comes to things like job applications. I think black people today, because of things like BLM, they have an advantage simply because of their skin color. And I think that's proven. I think when it comes to job applications, in 2021, 94% of stock market jobs went to people of color, even though I think they only make up 40% of the population. That is a privilege because of their blackness. And I think it comes from this idea that black people have a disadvantage. Even though we're 50 plus years from segregation, 100 plus years from slavery, we're still under this idea that black people have it harder than whites, and therefore they need some advantage.
Well, my next guest has a PhD in constitutional history and is the former Lieutenant Governor of New York, Dr. Betsy McCoy. You've been listening to Daniel.
Yes.
What do you have to say about what he's saying?
Well, there is a real problem, and just in the last 2 years, you can see that there have been so many lawsuits across the country against Macy's, Disney, against Gannett newspapers, against very large corporations that are setting quotas for how many minorities will occupy seats in management, for example. And once you set a particular number, it's inevitable that managers have to push aside the resumes from some of the young white men in order to meet those quotas. Equity, it sounds like the word equality, but really it's just the opposite. It means using preferences for minorities and women, and the inevitable result is that white men are disadvantaged. They go to the back of the line. I'll just give you 2 examples. The American Rescue Act had 2 provisions in it. The first one provided debt relief for farmers, but only black farmers. White farmers need not apply. I can tell you that the white farmers in northern New York, the dairy farmers, really needed that debt relief, but they were ineligible. Secondly, restaurant owners were devastated by COVID, so the law provided relief for them, but only for minority restaurant owners and women restaurant owners. Both of these provisions were overturned in federal court because they violate the 14th Amendment, the precious American notion that we're all treated the same.
So let's take a look at equity versus equality. Equality treats people the same. Identical resources, opportunities, regardless of individual needs. Equity adjusts resources and opportunities based on specific needs to achieve fair outcomes for everyone. The key difference is equality is uniform treatment. Equity are fair outcomes by addressing different needs. And this gets into something that's being really subjective, what the people that are administering the program value, if it's race or if it's gender or what, they can just decide, and then they start dispensing things based on trying to create some outcome, correct?
It's very subjective, but as you just pointed out, Dr. Phil, it's not necessarily fair because it's not true that only minority restaurant owners needed help. There were plenty of white male restaurant owners who were in deep trouble during COVID. They had to shut down. They lost their businesses. But they were told just because of the color of their skin, and those white farmers were told just because of the color of their skin, they were ineligible.
And you say the best way to end racial discrimination is to stop discriminating based on race, period, whether it's white, black, whatever.
And I borrowed that from Chief Justice John Roberts.
Here's John Roberts' quote about that. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And that means you gotta dial that out.
Right, and by the way, I'm very sympathetic to helping young African American or other minority kids who want to go to college, but don't do it based on their race. Let's have economic affirmative action. Let's make sure the kids who start without any advantages get a leg up based on their circumstances, not their race.
Yeah, I agree with the objective. I disagree with the methodology. And so do most of the people that have actually studied this and studied the impact. People want to curry favor with a certain demographic, then they'll beat this drum. But if people want to look at the impact, then it's very clear that this doesn't work. Affirmative action didn't work, DEI doesn't work. It just doesn't work. If you really want to help this population, then there are other ways to do it, but those programs have not been successful.
And you know, Daniel, you touched my heart because why should you have to feel white guilt? In fact, why should any child ever have to feel guilt? This idea of inherited guilt, what if we told German Americans who live in this country now that they couldn't vote because their ancestors under Hitler did terrible things? Americans don't believe in inherited guilt. We all get a fair chance.